that you listen, like my mother says, to the mother who bore me. He won't bore you. She won't bore you. In fact, the children call her Funny Grandma. And we all love her. And my mom wants to say a few words and perhaps even a few jokes to the Chatan of our Mitzvah, to Dovid. And Dovid said, even though the two grandfathers of Mevater and my two, you're missing 3 more speeches tonight. So give your utmost attention to my mom.
You mean I can't speak tonight?
And Uncle Stewie wants to speak tonight. Okay, so don't forget, this is instead of my speech, this is instead of Grandpa's speech and Zaidi's speech. So, and Aviv is going to speak at the end. So here's my mom. Okay, and it is in the spirit of...
But how Everyone stand up there.
What?
Go on, jump. Let's see how old you are.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right, now children, please sit down immediately. No balloons. All right, they call me Funny Grandma. I don't know whether it's visually or verbally, but I came through snow and sleet and hail to make my darling grandson Dovid's bar mitzvah. And he's actually propelled me 7 hours ahead of all of my New York, Baltimore, and Cedarhurst grandchildren. So I'm living 7 hours into the future. I'm way ahead of them. I'm Funny Grandma for the Flatbush 4, for the Baltimore bunch, for the Cedarhurst crew, and especially for the Efrat 8. When I left Brooklyn, the snow was so high, they told me people under 5 feet tall were not allowed out. I went out and wore a hat, and you saw my hat skimming along on top of the snow. My neighbor next door was shoveling his walk. My car was in the way. He shoveled all of his snow onto my car. You should know that in Brooklyn on 50th Street, there are lots of Hasidic kids that are sleighing down my car, on top of my car, on skis, on sleds, and I hope I find the car when I get back. I couldn't shop very much. I usually packed 2 valises. So I could only buy very, very few matanas when I came here. And I took my matched luggage, 2 shopping bags from G & Son. I packed them with goodies, and I came to Israel. It's a 10-hour trip on El Al. You know El Al. It's the airline for the minions. They serve you 2 meals, 1 at 2 a.m., and if they don't get you again, then they serve you while you're waiting for the carousel to go around, while you're waiting for your luggage. So we were on the plane, and I know it's a 10-hour trip, and I started to think about my grandchildren in Israel. And I thought of, and it came to me in the form of kaleidoscope vignettes. And the first one was, I bring some of my grandchildren to America, sometimes I come here, and Dovid came a couple of years ago, and I drove him down to the Bay Area, to the tennis courts, and we were going to go jogging, and the car stalled. It stalled so badly that an abandoned car passed us. And he said, you know, Grandma, this is no good. I said, look, we hardly ever use the car. We don't need a new car. And Dovid said, you need a new car. I said, look outside and see if the blinkers are working. And he looks outside and he says, they are, they aren't, they are, they aren't, they are. Well, I knew the blinkers were working. Then I said, maybe the car needs an oil change. So I drive into a gas station and they said, change the car and keep the oil. At that point, Dovid was very upset. We drove home, and he called my husband, his grandpa, in the office, and he said, "Grandpa, don't go home tonight. Meet us at the Oldsmobile dealer." Noah came to the Oldsmobile dealer, and I walk in. Dovid walks up to the sophisticated salesman, and he says, "These two people need a car." I was standing there. Dovid walks over and kicks a few tires, smells a little upholstery, looks at the finish, picks out a Oldsmobile Sierra. Unfortunately, the car was delivered the day after Dovid went home. He never got to see the car except in the showroom. But that's the kind of chutzpah this kid has. Let me tell you a story about Atara. Atara Leah is my favorite granddaughter in Israel. She's really a terrific girl. She came to America one time, and I said, "Come on, Atara, I'm going to give you the cultural tour." So I took her on the B train, formerly the West End Express, and we're going to go to the Museum of Natural History on 81st Street. And she says to me, "Grandma, I think you ought to say Tfilas Haderech." I said, "What, are you kidding? This train goes to Manhattan. You don't say Tfilas Haderech on a B train." The train keeps going. At Pacific Street, the doors open up, and a gang of wild girls from Sarah Hale High School come in. And they start hanging from the straps and menacing the passengers. I look at Atara. Atara looks at me. I say, "Take out the Tfilas Haderech." I came for Dovid's bar mitzvah. We brought Dovid to America a few years ago, and we stayed at a hotel called the Berkeley Carteret. And it was Pesach time, and he had to suffer through 2 Sidurim. And he was up in the room one day, and he said, "You know, Grandma, a strange thing happened." I said, "What happened?" He says, "Lady knocked at the door, said she was the chambermaid." And I said, "Well, what do you want?" She said, "I came to clean up." So I said, "Go ahead, clean up." She came in, took a shower, and left. I said, "She shouldn't have done that, Dovid." And I explained what a chambermaid was. We walked the boardwalk on Asbury Park boardwalk, and I'd give him math questions, and he would solve them, and he just loved it. He loved staying in New York. I said to him, "Dovid, what would you like for your bar mitzvah?" He says, "You know, Grandma, the one thing I would like is to stay in your house for a whole year and go to high school." And I forgot about it. He was only 11 years old. Time passed, and now he's 13, and he's in junior high school. And I said, "Well, Dovid, what do you want?" He says, "How about if I come to your house for 1 year to go to high school?" I said, "Listen here, Dovid, you don't know what high schools are like. You're not going to go to the kind of high schools that I teach in. But September 1st, you know who has a back-to-school sale? The gun shops. The gun shops run a back-to-school sale." Yeah, I walk into a classroom, and I start reading the register, the roll. And I look at some of the names, and the names are not Osnat, Shalhevet, Ariel, Moshe, Tzvi. They're names like Molly, Emily, Opium. I said, "Molly?" I said, "There ain't no such name, Molly." So he says, "It sure is, Teach. When I was born, they had a bracelet on my hand that said M-A-L-E. My mother called me Molly." Kid next to him, same problem. I said, "What's your name?" She says, "Femily." I says, "Your name is not Femily, your name is Emily." She says, "Same thing happened to me. Kings County Hospital, they put a bracelet on my hand, F-E-M-A-L-E, Brown." So I said, "Okay." But this kid called Opium, I couldn't take that kid. So I said, "You tell your mother to come up, PTA night. I want to speak to her." Very nice-looking mulatto kid, very, very well-dressed, and the mother comes up to see me, PTA night. Very nice African-American woman, a little bit like Oprah Winfrey. I don't know if you know her. And I say, I have opium in my class. I says, can't be. I said, you shouldn't call a boy opium. Opium is a dope. She said, that's my son. I said, opium is illegal. She said, that's my son. So I said, Mrs. Jones, opium is the seed of a wild white poppy. She says, that's my son. They treat us royally. It's the first time in an entire, we become sukkahs also. Dovid has a small room, but when he cleans up for us, you're able to put twin beds in, 2 dressers, a closet, and a desk. He takes all of his stuff out. The minute I come in, he says, Grandma, I want to make you comfortable. I want to make you happy because you make us happy. And I come in and I see a lady, a young lady, Leora Bajel and Heather Moretzky and Shane DeSone, and they're making open-faced sandwiches, and they treat us beautifully. There's only one problem with my daughter-in-law's food. After you eat a meal in her house, 2 days later you're hungry again. The kids are very funny. Bezalel has only South African and Australian friends. And you hear him say, Grandmother, I am so glad you are coming, so that when my husband gets off the plane, he says, do you have the tickets? I said, Bezalel's not around. Why do you talk like that? Bezalel takes us on an archaeological dig. And he takes us to an ancient mikveh, and he says, Grandma, look at the 2 flights of steps. Can you figure out why there are 2 flights of steps? I said, no, you tell me. And he says, well, when you are tummy, you go down on one side. And when you immerse yourself, after you've immersed yourself, you come up on the other side, you are tahara. I said, that's good news. And on that trip, Dovid came along with us, and he climbed the trees, and he brought down a lot of beautiful ripe figs. It's a pleasure to be with the family. A very strange thing happened to me on last Sukkot. I came out of the Makolet down in Efrat, and I talked to them like they're adults, and I talked to my classes like they're adults, and they talk to me like I'm a child. And I say to Shmuel, I really would appreciate if I had a book to read. He says, that's no problem, Grandma. We can go to the library. And there's a library opposite the Makolet. And I says, Shmuel, I know he's 5 years old. I say, Shmuel, I can't walk into this library. I don't have a card. You need a card to take a book out of a library. He says, no, you don't need a card. So he goes into the library, and in his fast Hebrew, I'm standing there like a dummy, he says something about America, that's just books. So I said, I'm his grandmother. I'd like to have a book. I realize I don't have a card. So he says, don't worry. He says, Mishpachat Daniel. So she says to me, Mishpachat Daniel? I said, yes. So she says, oh, of course, take a book. I took 2 books. This 5-year-old kid was helping me get library books in Efrat. They're very, very mature at this age. They're very wonderful. And Dovid, I'm glad I came to your bar mitzvah. You're one of the most charming, handsome, lovely young men. It's my pleasure to know I taught lots of 13-year-olds, and you're one of the top. You're one hell of a boy. You're a Lubavitch kid, and you're a kid that wants a Lamborghini. And you're a kid that lights up everybody's life. You know electricity, you've got the right connections, you make everyone happy, you make everyone smile. Oh, last Sukkot, my husband my husband fell ill, and he couldn't celebrate Simchat Torah. Anyhow, he was really very ill, and